Economic theories of federalism focus on one major benefit of federalism, which is that it allows for regional diversity in economic governance, because it enables states to tailor policies based on the local economic advantages and local issues. In India, this is evident in how states specialize in various sectors. Some states have emerged as industrial hubs. Some other states excel in agriculture, and some states lead in the information technology sector. Now, these regional strengths promote what we call economic interdependence. And this economic interdependence encourages internal trade, which stimulate and sustain economic growth. For instance, IT solutions developed by one particular state empower industrial operation in some other states. Goods from industrialized states find markets in agrarian states. Agricultural to industrial hubs and urban centers. So what is the role of the central government in this? The role of the central government is to support this type of interconnected growth. This type of interconnected growth dynamics, for which the government can take, or I would say is already taking, four types of actions. Government is trying to achieve this by establishing and maintaining a common market, which we already have since the implementation of the GST. By developing national infrastructure, which the government is doing through various big infrastructure projects, Sagarmala, Bharatmala, projects like this come to mind, and by promoting effective urbanization, which is reflected in the government's smart cities mission. And last but not the least, by boosting industrial competitiveness, which is being achieved through initiatives like Make in India and promotion of special economic zones. When we talk about special economic zones, India's experience with, say, special economic zones illustrates how federalism facilitates regional specialization. Regional specialization in attracting investments. Regional specialization in boosting exports. So there are several success stories. But at the same time, there are failure stories as well, which reveal the drawbacks, we can say, or the challenges of Indian government. One challenge is the lack of coordination between the center and the states, especially with regard to tax exemptions, land acquisitions, deforestation, displacement of communities. Because of all these reasons of lack of coordination, many approved states fail to take off. And the second challenge is regional disparities. For instance, in the context of special economic zones, it is said that India's private sector-led approach has led to concentration of industrial growth in the areas which are either already developed, or these areas were already sought after by the industry, so that they would have attracted investment anyway, without all kind of concessions which are given to the industries for investment in special economic zones. And this is generally contrasted with the approach of China, which is the state-led approach, where China strategically targeted underutilized and underdeveloped areas, made heavy investment, central investment, and converted those underutilized and underdeveloped areas into industrial hubs. So this is just one example of contrasting perspectives on development. And when it comes to the role of federalism in economic growth, there is a broader debate between centralized and decentralized approaches in order to achieve equitable economic growth. However, economic federalism is not about choosing between centralization and decentralization. It is about recognizing that both approaches, centralized as well as decentralized, are required, are essential for different purposes. For instance, Richard Musgrave, he advocated centralization for macroeconomic stability and redistribution, but also supported decentralization for efficient and responsive delivery of public goods and services. Similarly, Mansour Olson and Albert Britton, they propounded the principles of fiscal equivalence and perfect mapping, respectively. They say that there should be a clear connection or match between taxation powers and spending responsibility. And further developing these ideas, Wallace Oates propounded decentralization theorem and argued for localized provision of public goods and services. Now, the significance of decentralization in the literature has increased even more in second generation literature on fiscal federalism, but for very different reasons. Second generation theories of fiscal federalism also support decentralization, rather more than the first generation theories, but the reason is different. The reason is different because approach is different. And approach is different because perspective on government is different. As per the first generation theory, the public finance experts of first generation theory, they view governments as benevolent maximizer of social welfare. And they support decentralization because of a theoretical perspective that it brings the government closer to the people. However, in the second generation theories, government is viewed not as benevolent, but as self-interested, self-aggrandizing leviathan, seeking not to maximize social welfare, but to maximize their chances of winning elections. From this perspective, decentralization is required not to bring government closer to people, but rather to split sovereignty between levels. Not to enable benevolent government, which it is not, but rather to restrain and constrain these leviathans, to restrict the government tendency to overreach. Building on this tradition, economists often discuss about what we call distributive fiscal politics. Basler and Court, Ben Lockwood, they show that centralized decision making generally leads to unfair and suboptimal resource allocation, and there are a number of reasons for that. These traditions laid the foundations of Barry Vanga's theory of market preserving federalism. The theory holds that a very high level of subnational autonomy plus hard budget constraints within the context of a common market would lead to inter-jurisdictional competition, which would lead to efficiency, which would in turn lead to economic growth. Although India does not fully meet all the conditions outlined in this market-preserving federalism framework. Yet, the government has tried to achieve some of the effects through various measures. For instance, the government of India has institutionalized competition between states in order to improve governance and improve service delivery. Through initiatives like Ease of Doing Business Index. And it was in this context that the role of the leadership has come to play. In the heydays of economic reforms, we see several chief ministers emerging as what we call Vikas Purush, and there was a competition to develop their states and have this kind of a label. Chandrababu Naidu, Nitish Kumar, Narendra Modi, S.M. Krishna come to mind. They are actually known for transforming, and there is a literature on that. So they transformed economic fortunes of their states through their vision, leadership, and policies. But in the context of resource disparities, another question emerges side by side, which is that the central government must undertake redistribution. But that redistribution or equalization is to be undertaken in such a way that it does not diminish state government's incentive to improve their economy. In fact, in response to the popularity of market-preserving federalism perspective, redistributive federalism is reasserting itself, which prioritizes redistribution and cautions against unchecked competition. This brings me back to the core idea of ideal balance or the ideal policy mix between centralization and decentralization, between equity and efficiency, between autonomy and equalization. And the ideal mix depends on size of the state, the level, size of the country, the level of income, and the extent of economic disparities and ethnic diversity. These structural factors not only determine the ideal design, what should be, of federalism, but also determine how federalism affects economic growth. So these are the mediating variables. However, empirical literature reveals that these structural factors are not the only variables. There are important governance variables too, such as quality of political institutions, nature of political processes, and effectiveness of political leadership. Cross-country evidence shows, empirical literature, that fiscal decentralization is positively correlated with GDP growth. But in those countries which have better governance, effective institutional frameworks, and strong local fiscal capacity, if these conditions are not there, then the correlation between fiscal decentralization and GDP growth turns negative. Especially in those contexts where countries have this kind of a system of political clientelism. This makes the correlation even worse. So the question is whether we can ensure the growth enhancing benefits of federal system in the context of weak institutional structures, in the context of all these kind of problems of governance and very low local fiscal capacity. My answer to this is that yes, federalism can still deliver some of its growth enhancing effects, growth enhancing benefits, if we try to implement the second best solution. First best solution being the conditions laid out in the market preserving federalism. Those are the first best solutions. But those conditions cannot be implemented in the context of India. So we have to look for the second best solution. And it is in this context that I would like to mention the role of the central government. As per the market preserving federalism framework, which is the first best condition for enhancing growth, the growth enhancing benefits of federalism stem from a combination of independent revenue raising authority at the subnational level and credible no bailout policy imposed by the national government within the framework of a common market. After the implementation of GST in 2017, India fulfills one of these conditions, which is the common market. And I would say it is not just one of the conditions, but actually half of the conditions. The reason being that GST works best when states have access to at least one major tax base, one major source of revenue, which is not the case in India, but which is a key condition for market preserving federalism. Because no bailout policy, a credible no bailout policy, cannot be implemented in a context where states are dependent upon central finance. Although state governments in India obviously levy excise duty on alcohol and VAT on petroleum products, which give them autonomy at the margin, yet there is no scope for assigning broad-based taxes to the states. But there is a ray of hope. Because research shows that growth enhancing benefits of federalism depends not so much on how much fiscal autonomy states have, but rather on how well they use whatever little autonomy they have at the moment. So the states can have positive impact if they use their revenue and expenditure autonomy to inspire productive behavior, like encouraging idle trade. You are giving me trainers? Yeah. Okay. So, sorry. So if states encourage and inspire productive behavior, such as encouraging innovation, boosting savings, and investing in human capital, and also in skill development. But for this to happen, central government must also play its part. Now my second best solution focuses on the part that has to be played by the center, which combine four features of this second best solution, which arguably can make states engines of growth. First is design incentive compatible intergovernmental transfers and revenue sharing mechanisms. By incentive compatible, I mean that these transfers should enhance fiscal capacity and economic efficiency rather than filling the revenue gaps, which is mostly the case with regard to the approach that has been followed by the Finance Commission. 15th Finance Commission has proposed performance-linked incentives in health, education and agriculture, which is a step toward that direction, but much more needs to be done. So this was first. Second is enforce rule-based fiscal control. As Mr. K.J. Alphonse was saying, that you need a strong central government. But we need a strong central government, as strong, which can impose credible no bailout policy. I don't think in the context of India, any government, any central government can be as strong as to be able to impose hard budget constraints on states. So again, the second best is to enforce rule-based fiscal control in order to ensure fiscal responsibility and fiscal discipline. and also to address common pool problems, which are very common in the context where states are dependent on the national finances. Toward this end, the Government of India has implemented Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act. It was implemented in 2003, and later on it has been amended several times in 2004, 12, 18. And through this act, the Government of India has institutionalized fiscal discipline. And nowadays we are talking more about debt management, a point that that was brought up in the first session as well, rather than rigid targets of deficit reduction. The third is to establish independent fiscal councils or autonomous independent fiscal councils or autonomous fiscal councils, which are not political. And this is actually a recent innovation in the international literature on fiscal federalism. The 15th Finance Commission has also recommended independent fiscal council, but that recommendation has not been accepted. What would be the role of this fiscal council? It would be to monitor government's compliance with fiscal rules and to advise governments on fiscal policy matters. So now you understand why this recommendation has not been accepted. The fourth suggestion depends upon the implementation of this third suggestion. The fourth suggestion would be to integrate the technical expertise of fiscal council with political institutions and processes of intergovernmental financial negotiations or relations. And this kind of integration can be achieved through 4 steps. First is, now quickly, this is the last point. First step is that the fiscal council would recommend growth-enhancing fiscal federal framework. This will also define boundaries of center-state contestations, so that during the negotiation process, none of the party engage in opportunistic behavior. Second step would be that the institution of intergovernmental financial negotiation facilitates continuous dialogue, which means ongoing discussions with continuity, just as it now happens in GST Council, which stands in contrast to the ad hoc interaction in the interstate council, which is more important. Third step would be that this framework actively encourages reciprocal concessions. This is only possible if the inputs from fiscal council are taken as binding inputs for negotiations, which would obviously, as I just said, restrict opportunistic behavior by the stakeholders. This type of a concessionary federalism is a system where all stakeholders have incentive, most importantly, to relax their extreme positions, to drop their dominant strategies and work toward finding a common ground. Again, GST Council is a model of this kind of system. And it is because of this kind of system that GST Council was able to implement a unified tax regime, which otherwise was a contentious reform. And finally, the requirement, most important requirement, which has been recognized in fiscal federalism literature as well, that the outcomes of negotiations must be binding, so that no party deviates from what they agreed to during the negotiations in the council. So finally, concluding everything, designing a growth-enhancing federal system is like composing a symphony, balancing centralization and decentralization, efficiency and equity, autonomy and equalization, and most importantly, short-term political priorities and long-term economic sustainability. It has paid off. And this kind of symphony should resonate with our country's unique socio-political and cultural diversity if we have to realize our economic aspiration of becoming a Viksit Bharat. Thank you very much.